Thando Hopa, thank you very much for being with us today and for sharing some of your story and some of your journey with us.
Thank you for having me.
One of the things I'd asked you earlier is what is your full name and the meaning and who gave those to you? And your full name is very full indeed. Could you share with us again what your name is?
My full name is Amangwevu Anikiwe Umntana Thando. So I'm just going to break it down. Amangwevu is, I come from the gray-haired people's clan. So we were known as the Amangwevu people because we get gray hairs very quickly and they're beginning to pop up somewhere already. And then Anikiwe are given Umntana, a child, Thando, of love. So the gray-haired people were given a child of love.
That is a very sweet name.
Thank you.
And who gave you that name?
My grandfather gave me that name. When I was born, I came out not as pigmented as everybody else. So in order for him to assert the love that he had for me and the love that the family should have for me, he asserted that the child that you have now is a child of love.
In your family, are you the first person with albinism that you know of, or were there others before you?
I've heard of others, but I hadn't met them. But my brother came after me, and he also has albinism. But before that, no, it was actually quite brown. It was quite brown in my family.
And in your story, you talk about the fact that many times over the years you were approached to model. What finally made you say yes?
So I think after 3 times, different people, they could have been anybody from anywhere. But I didn't care for modeling, so whoever came and approached me, I was just like, no. And then the 4th person was Johan Kutia. And I didn't know who he was either. And to be honest, I didn't care. I was an aspirant prosecutor. I had no need for any modeling, whatever. Gert stopped me in the middle of, the mall, and he's like, oh, could you do a shoot with me? And, if you're interested. And then he gives me his card, and I'm just being polite. I'm just like, okay, it's fine. Bye.
Never see you again.
And then I went back to my sister, and I was laughing my head off. And I'm like, oh, this guy just came in, and he's just like, oh, could you do a shoot? And I'm like, isn't that ridiculous? And my sister was like, what's so ridiculous about it? She said, all this time, you never had any representation. Well, she put it in, now that, I've got the language for it, I'm putting it differently. But she was saying, you had so many perceptions that you had to deal with that you can break. Why wouldn't you want to take this kind of opportunity to change perceptions? And that's how it started. And to be honest, I thought it was going to be a brief thing, that we'll do this 1 shoot, 2 shoots, and then that would be it. But that was actually the beginning of a very interesting journey.
It seems as if you started, as a law student. I think many of us have that experience. My father's still waiting for me to go to law school. I keep explaining it's not actually going to happen. But, you go into a particular field, and in that, it seems as if your activism was awakened. And it's interesting that even as you move into modeling and more of an entertainment career, again, the sense of activism really comes through. In the years that you have been in the public eye and doing work to raise awareness about people living with albinism, what are some of the changes that you've seen?
I think, I always said that I think activism is more a character trait than a profession.
Interesting.
So I think it's something that you carry with you despite your profession. And when I started understanding my activism, and that voice was beginning to grow in my legal career, and then I took it through in my modeling career. Also, when I went to Gert and said, I want to represent albinism in a positive way, it was such an oversimplification. It was an oversimplification of identity and oversimplification of representation. Because I was a person who constantly understood that I needed to negotiate more than one identity. My identity in terms of me being a woman, in terms of me being Black, in terms of me being African, in terms of me having albinism. I was accountable for all of those identities. And also, I would face prejudice with respect to all those identities, or sometimes some. The first thing that I needed to have control over is something as simple as my hair. The second thing I needed to have control over is something as simple as the paleness of my eyebrows. And I had to say, it's okay for me to look like this and be like this in this space, even if it is a rare look to you. For me, when I started coloring my eyebrows, it was because everywhere I looked, I couldn't see a woman who looked like me being celebrated the way I look. So it became an interesting thing in that when I went into the media space, I had to negotiate how to just look like myself and keep the unique characteristics that are me present and prevalent. Personally, as time went on, I had to bargain less to look the way I do. And that really made me feel less of social barriers in terms of my mobility. It really helped. And I have to say the fashion industry is more advanced in terms of that representation because there's a variety of representation. There's a variety of stories, there's a variety of portrayals. In terms of film, that's still a bit, because there is still a tendency to stereotype in film and television. It's either, oh, we're going to deal with prejudice or muti killings, or the next story is going to be about, you know, this evil albinism person. Or the next story could be about otherworldliness or supernatural, you know. So there was always those three compartments, and you couldn't just be a woman who's a mother or a girlfriend or a doctor or a lawyer. The roles that were constantly coming my way, and that probably really, like, I think it's been the last role I was requested to do was to be a witch.
How charming, yes.
So I do think that there needs to be more of an education there, an advancement there, and progress. But I think in the fashion industry, there's been a really interesting variety. So I think that's moving faster.
And we sit now, and you've clearly been very successful, everything from the Pirelli calendar, even writing for it, not just posing, you know, to covers of Vogue. So these are very significant things in terms of the industry you're in. But it couldn't have always been easy or looked like it was going to work out as well as it did. How did you maintain that positive mindset? And what kept you going when times were difficult and when people maybe weren't as embracing, when the negativity did come your way?
When I started out in the industry, it was like, oh, she's so interesting. She's a lawyer and model, and she has albinism, and it was such a rare story. And then I sat back, trying to find my voice in this noise, and constantly seeing headline after headline telling me what my story was. And I would speak to people. They'd ask me a lot of questions, and I'd tell them about law, I'd tell them about my issues being a woman, issues around albinism, and my parents, and how awesome, and then they'd decide from all of that, albinism, that's all they'd hear, albinism, albinism, albinism. I started getting a sort of hypervigilance, because each time I was in the media space, it was almost like I had the question, are you going to other me? Are you going to make me so different in that you make the difference in othering as opposed to an acknowledgement of diversity? And I started feeling like my body was speaking so loudly. My voice was out, but nobody was listening. And I think one of the things that I started learning is to take control of the conversation and the story. And I didn't always do it in the way I would have liked, but I got better at it, and better at it, and better at it, to say, this is your story. Remember, this is your story. And I also really, at the core of it, I learned a sense of enoughness. To just say, I am enough, I am enough, I am enough, I am enough. It became a mantra to me. And that it helped a lot, because a lot of the issues that you read, I mean, there were things that I'd read, especially when I'd go onto the European media. And the comments were brutal. They were brutal, you know, and I would just be like, in terms of me, the way I looked, in terms of me being African, that's one thing, intersectionality. My identities would intersect. So people would say, oh, well, why don't you go back? Why are you in the West? Why don't you go back to Africa and be burnt by witches? That's two identities. One, albinism, the other, African. So I'm actually experiencing two kinds of prejudice at one time. And I think learning, I'm enough, I'm enough, I'm enough, you start drowning out the noises and you focus on what's important.
And I think that's what's so interesting about your story. It may not be albinism, but there are many things that have us on the margins because of various aspects of our identity. And so this idea, I am enough, I think is so critical. How do you, Thando, maintain that sense of enoughness and that relationship with yourself?
It's not easy. I think what we need to understand is emotional resilience doesn't mean that you're perfect at this thing, you know. Self-compassion is sort of an accumulated sense of acts. You know, you need to constantly decide that you're going to become more compassionate with yourself. And sometimes you have to stop and realize when your mind is hurt. Because your mind does get hurt, and you realize it when you are abusive toward yourself or somebody else. You just need to have a sense of self-awareness to know these are the signs that my mind is hurt, you know, and you need to have a process that says I need emotional aid, you know. With me, when I'm anxious, because anxiety means I'm not speaking to myself very well. I'm not speaking to myself very well when I have a lot of, you know, fear, pseudo-depression, when I'm going into those spaces, then I stop and I'm like, my mind is hurt. My mind is hurt. Pause. Your mind is hurt. When I get to that point of self-awareness, I have a low tolerance for things that shift my energy. I remove them. I remove them immediately. I'm like, I don't need this stuff right now. I literally go on protective mode. I speak to people who I feel give life to my energy, who understand me. I watch TED Talks, I do just whatever it is, I meditate, I do whatever it is to bring myself back to center. And when I start interpreting and perceiving things from a place of alignment, then I know, okay, I've healed my mind, now I'm better, you know? So I think you just need to have the sense of self-awareness to say, when I'm speaking this way about somebody, if I'm hating, you know, or if I'm, oh no, you're useless at this. Why can't you get this right? Pause. My mind is hurt.
What comes through in terms of the ways that you have managed to deal with the issues and challenges that you face in the industry and to develop this sense of enoughness is a real intentionality that you took the time, you carve out the space deliberately to understand who you are and what your triggers are. At what point did you realize you needed to begin to cultivate this relationship with yourself, that you needed to begin to learn these skills?
When I was prosecuting, I don't think I debriefed as effectively as I needed to. I thought I was debriefing, but I wasn't. I took on a lot of the energy of where I worked, the social ills. I was dealing with children who were being raped. And after some time, you start realizing that I can't do this way anymore. And I just mean emotionally. I had to first learn that you can critique how I walk on the ramp, or, you know, my argument in court, or whatever the case may be, my writing, anything. That's fine. I can improve. But my self-worth, not on the table. Not on the table. Work, that is something I make, I create. Self-worth, mine. Not for us to negotiate, you know. So I needed to still know that I am capable, I'm beautiful, I'm whatever. I needed to assert self. Work, you can have that. Me is me. And, you know, this sounds also a little bit cliche, but we have stories in our minds. We literally create these stories in our minds, you know. Oh, when I come and I speak to her right now, if I'm sitting here, she's gonna think this of me and that of me, and all of this hasn't even happened yet. It's really in your imagination. Then you start feeling your body. Your stomach tightens and you get hot. Your body is telling you that you are in danger. But at that point in time, the attacker is you in your mind. The victim is you in your mind. You're attacker and victim the same time. And you have to learn how to look at a situation and say, is this the truth? Is it the truth? You get creative and your mind expands and it tells this elaborate story. And the story puts your life in danger, all in your mind. Right? Because you start perceiving, you start seeing threats. That's why when I say your mind is hurt, because you start seeing threats everywhere. Everything anybody says, everything that you're doing, your work, you don't trust yourself, you don't trust people, all in your imagination. And you have to kind of start re-looking at it and say, but is that the truth? Am I not, can I handle this? Can I, you know, you speak to yourself in a way that puts you back to say, I'm not actually facing a threat. Whatever is happening, can I handle it? Yes, I can handle it, you know. So I think, yeah, it's one of the things.
What comes through is a real sense of agency. A lot of the language that you use is very active. So you decided that you were enough. You made a decision about your beauty. You tell yourself a different story. And I think that's so empowering, because when we allow other people to ascribe labels to us, the narrative can end up being anything. But when we decide we're going to write our own story, and as you did with the media and other entities when you were being erased, to really assert who you are and to live out that knowledge that you are enough, I think that's truly a powerful thing. Thank you for sharing so much of your wisdom and your experience with us. And we look forward to chatting with you hopefully soon.